Hello! Our story begins inside the Senate chambers of the Galactic Republic, where Padme Amidala was approaching the stand. The Battle of Geonosis had come and gone. The Senate was squabbling over the direction of their choices. Despite Representative Jar Jar Binks proposing that all emergency powers be given to the Supreme Chancellor, the Republic was reacting to the decision to reveal the Clone Army. Initially, the Republic believed that in the gifting of the emergency powers to Palpatine, that he would use them to create a Grand Army of the Republic. This would be done through a draft and recruitment. However, they now had themselves a clone army, and many were surprised by the arrival of a random army from the Outer Rim. Padme, like the rest of the Republic, agreed that if there were to be a war, then the clone army should be used. Why? Because they weren't sacrificing their own citizens for combat. Not to mention, the general population would likely start to have riots and uprisings in the scenario that the Republic men and women were being drafted, trained, and sent into active combat. Not to mention, aside from local militias and militaries, no one, not even the combined power of the Republic, had an active military personnel to hold up a proper war against the Separatist war machine. Padme stood on her pod, with Jar Jar behind her. She had already reprimanded him, sending a letter to the Gungan Council and requesting that they send another one of their members to the Senate to represent the Naboo. If they could afford to do that, then this process would likely go by a lot easier. She addressed the proposition that was made by Jar Jar and supported by the wider Republic. She did not denounce this decision, just used it to hop over to her main point. She agreed that during such a crisis, their leadership should be afforded the trust to lead their party and their government into facing off on the political battleground with Dooku. Padme iterated that Dooku did not represent the Confederacy though, and they were not separatists. Padme knew that she would have to mince her words and selectively choose phrasings and sentences that wouldn't paint her as a separatist loyalist. Again, being that she openly defended the emergency powers and agreed with the entire usage of the clone army, the people of the Senate were able to listen. She didn't disregard what they had done in her absence. She brilliantly used these points to aid her as she searched for support within the Senate. Padme suggested that in order to find peace before a true war began, the Republic as a government needed to reject the clone army. There was a quick uproar from the Senate chambers and she waited. It eventually slipped into a murmur. Padme then addressed the people of the Senate and told them that despite her calls for rejection of the clone army seeming unprecedented, she had a couple good points to help them consider her proposal. With their victory at Geonosis, they had just shown the Confederacy that they could win this war. They brought out a grand army, and the Jedi were ready to serve. As the only individual within the entire Senate that was present at Geonosis, she could attest to the bravery and valor of the clone army. However, they were not a means to an end. Despite their bravery and despite their battlefield prowess, they were simply proof that the Republic could hold its own against the droid armies of the Separatists. She rejected the clone army because they were not trying to win a war. This divide was caused by individuals, and these individuals could drastically affect the lives of billions, maybe even trillions on a galactic level. Individuals, not governments. If the Senate wanted to fulfill their duty to their constituents, they shouldn't lie to them. They shouldn't support the war. Everyone in these chambers knew what war meant. It was the most profitable business in the galaxy, and each of them could fill their pockets with credits to make sure this war lasted longer than it needed to. But they could not, in good faith, support the war when their duty was public service. Many in the Senate weren't surprised by Padme's stance. It had been her stance ever since the Trade Federation's blockade over Naboo. She had resilience, and the people could see that, but she was fighting an uphill battle. There were many that agreed with her, but all signs were pointing to the beginning of a war that they couldn't stop from happening. Padme didn't stop her pursuit for peace though. She continued further. After suggesting that their jobs were public service, she delved into her argument. Not only were the clones valiant soldiers, but they came from nowhere. Their creation was a mystery, and she could understand that they were acting out of desperation. But wasn't it a little odd how so much of this separation happened between closed doors? As a survivor of multiple assassination attempts and even more smear campaigns, she pleaded with her allies, her cohorts, her political rivals, and fellow senators to see what was happening. Someone wanted her dead because she spoke for peace. Someone wanted her dead so that they could force their way into the war. She almost died on Coruscant and she almost died on Geonosis. She promised everyone that she would not give up this fight until they had stopped this war, but war did not need to happen. Having just spoke to Dooku on Geonosis, she understood that he was playing a role. He wanted her and the Naboo to join the Separatists. The Confederacy's political motivations were not war. They were forced there by their head of state, one who had garnered too much power. In senator speak, without directly saying it, she was calling Palpatine's rise to power unnecessary, and even suggesting that it was wrong. She continued on, making parallels to Dooku and Palpatine without directly saying it. No one in these chambers, except maybe a few, were dull. Most of them were very intelligent, and they got the gist of what she was saying. Padme's proposition wasn't to allow the Separatists to win. It was not giving power away to another form of government. It was a rejection of the clone army. It was a rejection of the Clone War, and it was a rejection of what Dooku strived to do with his unrestricted power. Padme spoke to not just her Senate, but the one on Raxus with this. They had proved that war could and would be deadly. Geonosians were directly affected by the battle in their home world. Imagine what would happen if it stretched out to the rest of the galaxy. The criminal syndicates of the Outer Rim could see their system as fragile. They could not allow this movement, one started by Dooku, to seep into the political efforts to serve the galaxy. Once she was finished, Palpatine, as he had following Padme's assassination attempt, decided to send the Senate into a recess. Despite it being pretty much the middle of the day, there was no reason to continue this conversation until the various members of the Senate had their own fair responses. This was an overstep of his executive powers, but he wanted to give Lot Dod and the other Separatist allies within the Senate the proper time to prepare a response, because they technically didn't have anything to counter with. Palpatine also needed to make sure Padme died before their next session. It was clear that she was a detriment to his plan, and she had proved some really good points. Why could the Republic need to accept the Grand Army of the Republic if there was no war? The Clone Army was on Coruscant. Palpatine planned on making them an official army for the Republic, but now he couldn't do that because of this recess. For now, the men would gather up in the landing guards in the Senate district and wait. The issue is, Palpatine was able to commission a Grand Army of the Republic, but that wasn't the question or the problem. The real constraint was what kind of army it was. The Republic was prepared to meet the Separatists head-on, but they hadn't decided if they wanted to do a draft or just use these clones, because the bill signed was technically just a quote-unquote Grand Army of the Republic. Not a draft, not a clone army, just a Grand Army. Palpatine's plan was both brilliant and lucky. He had just hit a slight hiccup in the road because Padme planned on foiling his luck. Senators were in agreement that the clones should be used in case of the war, but if Padme had truly spoken to Dooku, which she had in a deleted scene, then she understood what they were dealing with. The Senate just had to decide if they truly wanted to trust her judgment or not. She could have warped the conversation in the direction she wanted it, just to make sure the Republic decided to back out of the war. This recess would determine the future of the Clone Army and that of the Galactic Divide. Inside the Jedi High Council chambers, future member Obi-Wan Kenobi was relaying information to the Jedi. His student was now a knight, and Anakin was with Padme inside of her Senate office on Coruscant, being that Padme refused to let her personal attachments take her away from her duty. Master Kenobi, following the funeral of all the fallen Jedi of Geonosis, including former council member Coleman Trebor, was here to express worry for the Separatist movement. The council had watched the entire debriefing inside the Senate. Padme was focused on making sure a full-blown war didn't result from Geonosis, and they agreed with their stance. Obi-Wan was also coming into the chambers to relay information similar to hers. While he was imprisoned on Geonosis, he and Dooku had a conversation about the Sith. Dooku wanted Obi-Wan to join, and warned of a Dark Lord of the Sith at the helm of the Galactic Senate. Many of the counselors believed that this was a Sith trick, one to influence the Jedi to do something rash, but something Padme said made Obi-Wan consider the possibilities of Dooku's comments. He brought this to the council. If only mere individuals being the key word, were deciding the fate of the galaxy, then it was entirely possible that a Sith, or Dooku's master, was supporting the Republic, or inside of it. If they could drag the galaxy into a war, a civil war that spanned from each edge of the galaxy, then it was entirely possible that maybe the Sith were within the Senate. Plo was the first master to speak up. While he thought there was rationale for this, Obi-Wan was being a bit too unrealistic. The Sith had hidden themselves well, that the Jedi Council frequently had members inside the Senate. Surely they would have felt the presence of a Sith Lord. Mundi concurred. Say, for example, if Palpatine or his aide Mas Amedda or even former Chancellor Valorum were a Sith, the Jedi had been inside their room with them over and over and over again. Surely they would have felt something. The Jedi hadn't sensed Maul's return, but Master Qui-Gon and young Kenobi were able to face him on Tatooine and Naboo. The same went for Dooku on Geonosis. The Force would guide them into the right direction here. While there was some legitimacy to his concerns, the Jedi could not intervene. They did not have a stake in this conversation. For now, as May slid into the conversation itself, the motion of the Jedi Order would be to watch the Senate and react to their reaction. In the meantime, Jedi Scouts and Outpost Masters would be keeping an eye on Separatist movements. Master Kenobi suggested that they make movements against some of Count Dooku's potential military leaders. The counselors weren't all surprised by this. Obi-Wan didn't mean by inciting violence, but if they could insist that Dooku's movement was a wrong one, then some of the non-droid generals and leaders could be changed. That'd be very difficult, but it was a valid concern for Master Kenobi. Someone like Nute Gunray likely wouldn't change, but there was a hope in doing so. Master Yoda would later assign Jedi to go into the Outer and Mid-Rims to find Separatist loyalists to see if they could change their positions. Padme wouldn't spend the night inside of her normal apartment. She had now gained the attention of the High Council, so Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Kit Fisto were watching over her. She was sleeping in an upper-class hotel in the Economic District, and no one, aside from the Jedi and her guard, knew that she was there. Good thing, too. Due to Jango's little failure of past the evil centipedes, Palpatine went for a more blunt approach, a detonation of her residence, which killed a grand total of no one and scared the soul out of some people in the apartments below her. Padme was working all night and she did get the news, but without anyone knowing where she was kind of unfazed. Being threatened by foes was not her biggest fear in the galaxy or in the world. She had a job to do, and she would fulfill it. When the morning came around, the Senate was clamoring for a response. Maybe they didn't agree with Padme on all of her stances, but an attack on her was an attack on all of them. Many were eager to see if Padme's stance had changed since the previous night, and when she took the podium, it had not. She continued telling the people that this was all the proof they needed. They were being forced into war by individuals. She had many people that were friends with her inside the Separatist government. These people were also friends with many other people inside this government here on Coruscant. They were not behind this, and she promised them that if they were given a chance to have peace, instead of trying to perpetuate a war, then they could criminalize the real culprits, avoid a galactic war that could go on for who knows how long, and they could reform what had been lost. Padme put her trust into the democratic process. She agreed that tensions were high, and that they hadn't been this high in any of their lifetimes. But just like the blockade that surrounded Naboo, she targeted Nute Gunray, not the Trade Federation. If the Senate could remove the bad people from the equation, they could avoid this conflict. Many within the Senate were moved. However, there was one still crucial juncture for many of them. They could become millionaires off the war. Many of them already were, but this war could turn all of them into some of the wealthiest people in the galaxy, especially because all the war funding that would have gone to local militias and training would be funded into a clone army that got no real funding to begin with, so it would just fill their pockets and line them. But the short-term increase in wealth did not guarantee long-term wealth. What if they lost the war? What if the clones had only one real successful battle and lost the rest? What if the executive branch expanded too far? These were all fair and valid questions. Maybe not fully feasible, especially not at the current state, but it gave a lot of people within the Senate a chance to consider the odds of losing everything for a short-term payout. The credits were definitely worth it because most politicians were ready to sell out their constituents, but they would side with Padme. The Republic would put it to a vote, despite what Palpatine wanted quietly. After Padme spoke, Lot Dodd and the other corporate representatives pushed for a war, but their words meant very little in the wake of another assassination attempt. What proved Padme's point is that these people, the ones trying to perpetuate the galactic divide, is that they were not under assassination attempts. Individuals like Lot Dodd from the Trade Federation, for example. There was of course the fear that anyone who sided with Padme could be assassinated, but no one thought it'd be feasible to wipe out the entire Galactic Senate. No one truly considered the idea of a rising autocrat. They all saw what Padme was pleading, and they agreed. Perhaps they could reach a mutual agreement. Plus, if Padme was wrong, then the war was just being delayed, giving the clone army plenty of time to grow in size and be ready in case the conflict really did come. There was a sense of worry around how trustworthy the clone army was, but that didn't matter at the moment. Palpatine was forced to ready the vote, and by a 2/3 Senate majority, the clone army was officially rejected, barring the military force from Coruscant and sending them all the way back to Kamino, where they were very quickly running out of space on Tipoca City. The Senate agreed at the end of the day that this was a better option, especially because many felt liberated by the lack of military presence on the planet. It didn't totally mean that there was no war, it just meant that true deliberation would begin. Dooku was informed by this, and Palpatine told his student to make sure anyone who could or would side with the Republic was executed. This whole operation was backfiring quickly, and as Chancellor, Palpatine had to continue playing the good guy in this scenario, which was becoming increasingly difficult to do. With the Republic switching into focusing on peace, because technically speaking, they were the aggressors on Geonosis, Dooku had to shift his entire playbook. The war should have been going on by this point, and had Padme gone to Naboo and got married, it would have been total war. But now, the Sith were trying to start a war from nothing. Thanks to the work of the Senate, people who had friends that were trying to start the Confederacy were able to start speaking to others and get them to agree to a neutral location, where they could discuss why the Confederacy was born. So much of the neglect of the Republic had pushed the systems of the Confederacy into the new government because of complacency. There were biases from core-bred politicians, and when the war almost came, they showed the Confederacy exactly why they seceded to begin with. The Republic was corrupt, it was overwhelmed with supercorporations that had too much political influence, and there was a strong sense of favoritism for the core. The irony being, the people of the Outer Rim that had a stake in these politics didn't want more. They wanted equality, but in the minds of the core, it wasn't equality. It was trying to steal their power and take from them. On the other side of things, Dooku didn't promise total war. He promised freedom from the Republic and from the corporate power that controlled all the greed in the galaxy, but now it seemed like he wanted war. During a meeting on Toydaria, which at this point was still neutral territory, the senators from both sides came together to discuss what could be done to avoid war, like what was seen on Geonosis. Despite assassination threats being made, the brave politicians from both sides, the ones that didn't want war, came together to try and bring the peace. Due to these assassination attempts, the people suggested that Dooku and Palpatine be kept far away from these talks. Their head estates could not be at risk. The Jedi were also permitted to have 2 members, so they sent Masters Mundi and Adi Gallia. The 2 Jedi just sat in, without saying anything, just taking notes. Padme and her allies spoke first. They did come with Lot Dod from the Trade Federation, but he forced himself in so that he could create disruption, per Palpatine's orders. There was also someone else on the Confederacy side to incite an end to these peace talks. The Sith were pulling all the strings they could. On top of this, there were also warships present, and there were warriors from both sides, B-1s for the Separatists and a local sector military force for the Republic. The conversation between rivaling political factions was a little rocky at first, before it became peaceful and almost evolved into total chaos again. The war felt inevitable during these talks. What the Separatists wanted was free trade. They didn't want influence from the Federation, banking clans, or Commerce Guild. They wanted to have the ability to have the same freedoms as the core. They didn't knock the core, and they didn't call the Republic stock up, even though it was deserved. Ironically, there were Outer Rim and Mid-Rim senators present on behalf of the Republic that very quickly realized that they should have joined the Confederacy. The system of the Republic was broken, and the Separatist senators explained that there would be no reunification if Palpatine was at the helm. Another man, representing some core world, demanded that if Palpatine was done away with, then Dooku needed to be done away with too. The Separatists didn't have an issue with that. To many people of the Confederacy, they weren't loyal to their head of state. He was a public servant, just like the rest of them. But the man who spoke up with such a drastic, perplexed tone showed off why people feared the Republic and wanted out. These people were loyal to their head of state. They were loyal to Palpatine, when their loyalties should be to their local systems and the people that elected them. It was here, and agreed upon, that the Republic would allow an open election, giving anyone a chance to run for the seat of Chancellor. With this came a signed treaty for a permanent ceasefire, essentially meaning that if the Republic or Confederacy broke this agreement, then their supplies would be cut off. This ironically would affect the CIS more than the Republic, but it still would affect both governments nonetheless. There was also a clause in this agreement that stated that the banking clans in particular would lose out on their monopolization of the galaxy. And finally, the clone army was not permitted to be seen on Republic territory. If the Republic was worried about a war, then they were superstitious. No one in this room, not even the plant placed by Dooku, wanted a war. The CIS wanted to have their freedom. That's why they broke away from the Republic, because Palpatine was corrupt and the corporate demagogues had too much power in the game. The Treaty of Toydaria also had a term limit. It would last for about half a year. If there was no sign that the Republic was changing, then the Confederacy would certify itself as a separate entity, without ever wanting to form up with the Republic again. On the trip from Toydaria back to Coruscant, many of the senators were a little upset. Lot Dot was the most upset, but the others were kind of ashamed that they had backed down. They allowed a separate government to dictate the direction of their own government, and in their minds that wasn't the right approach. This felt like cowering, and many people felt the desire to return to Coruscant and change their minds. This gave them 6 months to prepare a plan of action for war. If they could get their own military formed, they could eclipse the size of the clone army itself, and win this thing for themselves. Padme was heartbroken as she watched each member of the Senate that came with her go back into their corrupt minds and decide that the best way to approach this was by drafting tens of millions of young men and women and throwing them at the front lines. She tried to reason with them, but the only thing the Senate agreed on together in this vessel was hosting a free election. The Jedi, before the free election was brought to the Senate chambers, had received intel that Dooku had created a Jedi killer. Thanks to the insider sources, individuals that were able to trace Grievous back to his home world found that he was a warrior that hated the Jedi, one who was forced into an accident by Dooku and told it was the work of the Jedi Order. In an effort to combat this, Master Plo Koon went with a Jedi task force to Kaylee to rectify what had been mistakenly started. This was never the intention, just simply an accident turned catastrophe waiting to happen. They would not interact with Grievous on a personal level. Instead, they would try and influence him with outside sources. Hopefully, it would work in their favor. When Padme returned to Coruscant, her new representative was present, General Roose Tapals from the Battle of Naboo. He was someone that the Gungan Council entrusted to assist Amadala with ensuring the war never came to a head. Padme was also sent a message, one informing her of something the Jedi had uncovered. There was a mad scientist that was in coalition with a separatist called Dr. Nuva Vindi. She thanked them for informing her, but she wanted nothing to do with this case. It would only drive a wedge further between the Republic and the Separatists. Due to the agreement between Republic and Separatists, Palpatine would be blindsided when Lot Dod called for the free election, stated in the Treaty of Toydaria. Palpatine was not pleased, but he planned some alternatives to this, as Dooku got to work on finally removing those individuals responsible for the Treaty of Toydaria. The issue is, because both members of the Confederacy and Republic would be killed, it would further prove that this war was being perpetuated by someone who only wanted power. The Jedi considered suggesting to the Republic that there was a Sith, but decided against it because to normal people, that didn't mean anything. Palpatine ran a very strong election, but there were those, like Padme, who were able to divide the vote in the Senate. The Republic would only elect under a 2/3 majority vote, and Palpatine didn't have it. Neither did any other candidate. This forced the Republic to go into a deep election. In the Outer Rim, the Kaminoans felt betrayed by Dooku, and they were getting impatient. They were sitting here with a military and could do nothing with it. Just sitting there. Couldn't go anywhere. They could easily inform the Jedi of what had happened, and that would leak into the Republic Senate. It wasn't something they wanted to do, but if Tyrannus kept them waiting, then they'd have no other choice but to do that. They needed to get paid, and someone was going to pay them. Because the Republic election dragged on for so long, it gave time for senators like Padme and her delegation of 2,000 to do work that went under the radar. Thanks to Representative Tapals, Padme was able to relay information from Coruscant to Raxus, where senators and representatives learned of the actions taking place. Due to the nature of the free election, Palpatine didn't have his emergency powers. Mas Amedda was given the executive role, considering he wasn't running for any elective spot. He was basically just working as a moderator. He allowed Padme's bills to pass through, because they were popular amongst members of the Senate, even though Palpatine would have vetoed them before they ever reached his desk. Mas Amedda always played the game so he could come out on top, and that was what he was doing here. The only reason he ever considered this was because Palpatine didn't win the first election. If Palpatine had come on top after the Toydarian Treaty, then this would never be the case. But the political fallout forced him to support Padme, because it could garner him favorability in the rise of whoever was the new Chancellor. General Grievous, on the other hand, after weeks upon weeks of being told that everything he knew was a lie, returned to Kaylee. There was an informant that became a really close ally to Grievous. Because Dooku was more focused on the political ramifications of the Toydarian Treaty, Grievous was kinda left to sit out alone inside of his flagship. A new ally from his homeworld, one who was close in ties to the Jedi, joined him, never telling Grievous of how close he was to the Jedi. This Kaylee man continued feeding Grievous information about the Jedi and how much they had done for him in their planet. There were even a few conversations about Grievous's accident, the one that almost got him killed, that started to mess with Grievous's mind. Grievous wasn't weak, and he wasn't fooled easily. But maybe he was turned down the wrong path by manipulation far outside of his own control. When he returned to his own home world, he found the Jedi had cleaned it up, but they didn't wait around for him. Due to the free trade market that was forced from the Treaty of Toydaria, the Jedi were able to intermingle themselves with one of Mandalore's allies, and get them to supply the people of Kaylee. It helped boom their economy, and the Jedi compensated the new trade allies. Outside of forcing Grievous to question his loyalties, the free trade market started to drastically change the game for the megacorporations. The representatives were trying to keep Palpatine in office, and as they were doing that, their votes were meaning less and less. Many within the Confederacy, especially as the Republic election dragged on, saw that they didn't need a Confederacy movement. They needed to converse with the people of the Republic. They were making serious change in the galaxy, and they wanted to help inside the Galactic Republic, not a Confederacy that was going nowhere. Systematically, for individual planets and systems, the free trade allowed them to do two things. Firstly, they were able to capitalize on their own trading and resources, giving individual planets a chance to boost their local economies without inflating the already robust megacorporations by giving them room to build on their systems and planets. Secondly, it gave these individual systems, especially those not within the Republic, the incentive to join it. With these systems fleeing a dying Confederacy, especially with the multitude of failed assassination attempts and rifts within their own system, it became clear to Dooku that this plan was failing. As he prepared to wage war in the galaxy, he waited for another week, eagerly wondering what would happen to Palpatine in this election. Sidious had informed his student to wait it out. They were going to win this election, and then they'd pick up right where they left off. Just as the Republic planned, they were still building a military force in secrecy, and it was a large one with 10 million new recruits. However, despite Palpatine's plans for a clone war without inhibitor chips and without clones, the election came to a close. When it first started, there were various representatives and individuals who had votes. This followed right after the Treaty of Toydaria. Lot Dod, Palpatine, Padme, Lolo, Purs, Goom Sam, and even a couple other write-ins for Bail Teles, the former senator of Alderaan, now replaced by the powerhouse politician Bail Organa. As the election ran late, Goom and Lot lost out because they were corporate representatives, and Bail steamrolled into first place, before losing out to Palpatine and Padme. Naboo completely controlled the election because Palpatine and Padme were the politicians that drove most of the debate within the Senate. Bail also dropped out because it became apparent that he was taking votes away from his friend Padme, and he wanted Palpatine to lose. The election came to a close after 4 runs between Padme and Palpatine, with Senator Amadala securing the 2/3 majority. So much of her favorability came from both new members to the Senate, especially those who left a Confederacy voting for her, and of course those already a part of the Republic that were profiting off the free trade. Naturally, there was some fear about leaving behind the Federation, banking clans, and other megacorporations. But with free trade, systems like Kaylee were able to get back on their feet and start again. It was replicated elsewhere in the galaxy, and representation championed an individual who would ensure protection for constituents of each political representative, regardless of their individual policy-related stances. This election forced Palpatine from office, and sent him scurrying away to Serena where he could begin an alternative plan, one he was working on since the Treaty of Toydaria. Also, with Chancellor Padme becoming Chancellor, the Senate seat for Naboo slipped down to General Roose Tapals for the time being. Padme was surprised, but she accepted the responsibility with resolve. This was her chance, and that of the Republics, to completely alter the status of galactic history in a positive way. Just as her first week as Chancellor started, and she settled into her role, 2 major developments blindsided her. The first being that the Confederacy had since broken up and formed into and around the Republic, aside from the Separatist Council like Gunray, Tambor, and the rest of the sleazy bunch. Dooku announced, with orders from Palpatine, that he was going to begin a war on the galaxy. He would conquer it with his droid armies, and the 10 million troopers created by the Republic in secrecy would be destroyed. This was meant to cause a rift between the Republic and the reinstated members that abandoned the dying Separatist movement, but this only firmed their decision. Dooku was trying to start a war. Padme was right, and with Palpatine nowhere to be seen, one could only assume that he joined Dooku. The other development was a Kaminoan message from Lama Su. He informed the new Chancellor that Tyrannus, in other words Dooku, was behind the creation of the Clone Army. He planned on using that army to usurp power from the Republic and genocide the Jedi Order. Padme was a bit surprised by this as well, but used this new information to prove to the Republic that their fears of the clones were correctly placed. With internal Republic support for the Separatist war movement coming from Lat Dod and other corporate representatives, the Republic ousted them from power, and therefore put the super corporations on the chopping block. If they wanted to support war, then they would lose support, even if it meant cratering the Republic economy. However, there was another development. Thanks to the Jedi, General Grievous wasn't going to let the Sith win this little war. Did it look like he cared for the Republic or the Jedi? Sure. Did he? No. He didn't care at all, but he wanted revenge on those who wronged him and his people. Grievous's only intention was to make sure the Sith got what they deserved. Dooku and Sidious wanted to use Order 99 on the droid army, but it would backfire on them because it would turn the droids against them too. They tried to override Grievous's control over the droid army, but because he was sitting with them for several months doing nothing, that wouldn't work, and within the span of a month or so, the Sith would be extinct, aside from Maul, who would never be found on a trash world, so actually yeah, pretty much the Sith would be extinct thanks to General Grievous. Now, the political ramifications of a monstrous droid army sitting idly under the control of a revenge-seeking cyborg wasn't exactly the greatest thing in the galaxy. Padme therefore invited General Grievous to Coruscant alone. He agreed, but he came with a fleet and protected by his personal guards. Inside Padme's Chancellor's office, they would sit down together and meet. The Jedi Council sent Yoda, Mundi, Peel, and Kenobi to oversee this meeting. They were not threatening, just sitting in, which was encouraged by Padme. She explained that she wanted to be friends, but he had to understand that people would not be favorable of a massive military floating around aimlessly. Grievous wasn't one for diplomacy, but his big shtick was that he didn't want to side with anyone. He was only here out of curiosity. He was fighting for himself. It's why he killed the Sith, and it's why he stole the army away from the Federation and Techno-Union. Their Separatist Council was eradicated by him. He took the army, but his quest for conquest hadn't been determined yet. He was trying to figure that out himself. Master Mundi suggested the Outer Rim. It would allow General Grievous to fulfill his desire, while also giving him a chance to not target Republic allied worlds. In this scenario, they could get rid of the criminal syndicates and so forth. Padme did not like the idea of war. They just avoided one to start another that wouldn't look good on her record. But she told Grievous that if she agreed to this notion of conquering the Outer Rim on behalf of the Republic, then there would be terms of war. Huh? What did that mean? Well, simply put, no hurting civilians, freeing slaves, and establishing outposts to help the people and protect them. It was very humanitarian. Grievous wasn't a fan of it, but he was allowed to openly conquer, so why not? He hadn't found his path in life yet, and he didn't have to fight the Republic, which had a mounting up army that could technically stand up, but not really. So this was probably his best opportunity. After this meeting, they would sign a treaty, and he would make a statement to the galaxy. They would understand what was happening. It would also give clarification on Dooku and Palpatine, as well as help the people understand that the mega corporations were plotting against the Republic. As Grievous began his conquest, Padme worked hard to ensure two new pieces of legislation made their mark. The clones were paid for, using Dooku's and Palpatine's estates. She and the Republic passed a bill, barring the Kaminoans from ever building an army again. However, they were forced to remove the inhibitor chips, and the clones, after being freed from the biochips, were sent in after the droid armies to clean up the mess. This had droids and clones working together on outposts and on humanitarian missions. Battle droids were used for actual battles, and the clones were used for humanizing the Republic push for conquering the Outer Rim. The other piece of legislation was a multi-step plan to ensure mega corporations never gained a foothold in the galaxy, in a selected quadrant, or in a given sector. Corporations could grow into multi-system sizes, but not any further. This also depended on the nature of the business, like if it was a bank or a necessity. Grievous's conquering of the Outer Rim wasn't swift, but it was very enjoyable for him. With the full power of the Separatist military at his disposal, he was able to rip through every foe he faced. But something changed within Grievous. While his heart didn't grow 3 times in a given day, he was called a liberator. He was referred to as the hero of the Outer Rim. Instead of being feared galaxy-wide, which is what he initially wanted, he was championed. This gave Grievous a sense of euphoria, unlike ever before. Every system he went to, people celebrated his name. General Grievous wasn't just a hero or a general, he was a legendary figure, one who would fundamentally change the lives of every single being in the Outer Rim. With the Outer Rim slowly joining the Republic, one planet at a time, it coincidentally kept the Republic from cratering into a recession. When the megacorporations faded out of existence, their assets dried up, so they were sold off for cheap. With so many new systems becoming a part of the greater Republic, they were able to level everything out to stop a recession from coming. Padme's term as Chancellor would last longer than Palpatine's, and it would begin the new golden age of the Republic. The Jedi maintained their position, and thanks to aid from Padme, they were able to fund outposts all the way out to Tatooine and back up to Megiddo. The Order grew exponentially, and they kept their eyes out for the return of the Sith, which never came. Grievous, the hero of the Outer Rim, would remain in charge of the Republic military, which included clones, droids, and servicemen and women who signed up after the Treaty of Toydaria. All those men and women, drafted before the vote to make Padme Chancellor, were also able to retire a couple years after active service because of this, which meant they didn't really have to do much. The clones were also given a chance to get themselves into the galaxy and become actual citizens, which was nice for them as well. Anakin and Padme would eventually get married, but it would take longer due to the stressful events following Geonosis. But it all proved worthwhile in the end. Their relationship was better because they waited. Anakin did train Ahsoka, but he never saw any action, not from the war and glory that Grievous received in the Outer Rim. The Republic as a government would establish itself as a strong face in the galaxy. They wouldn't give in to tyrants again. There wouldn't be a rise in autocratic powers, and new legislation was passed to make sure a scenario like Dooku and Palpatine never was able to happen again. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Brood36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granite D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Colin Rooney, Shark Midori, RG38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sense Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yi Gamer, Lord Callie, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lakes of Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Really kind of Star Wars political, but the goal I had when I went into this was to build a very tense story. I wanted everything to feel tense, where it could offshoot into different directions at any time, and in a way I think I accomplished that. I hope that resonated with you, because that was what I was trying to accomplish in the story, where I was just consistently building up this tension to come to a head, and it kept getting displaced in different areas, like the Treaty of Toydaria, the election, Grievous ending up killing the Sith, just this constant swaying of decisions, and how every little minute decision impacted where everything went for everyone in the story involved. I really wanted the General Grievous side arc, the C-plot, I guess you could call it, to be like the anchoring factor for the Republic at the end of the story. So it's kind of thrown in there out of nowhere, where the Jedi are like, oh, this guy named Grievous doesn't like us, uh-oh. And then out of nowhere in the end, he's like, I'm gonna kill the Sith because they smell bad. And then he does it. So I hope you all enjoyed the story. A bit different, a little bit more Senate-oriented, but you guys have seemed to enjoy these stories in the past, so a lot of fun kind of focusing on the pre-Clone Wars era, taking some of those Attack of the Clones deleted scenes that I think are just really perfect, honestly, and kind of implementing them into the story. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.